Hi, this is a quick video on some vintage Leica lenses. When you first start looking at the options that you have for lenses for using with the Leica cameras or the Voigtlander or Leica mount cameras, you start noticing that you have a pretty big selection of lenses to use. Some of them, like from Leica, this is a 50mm Summicron. Some of them are pretty good values. Some of them are a little bit too expensive. This is the Elmar. This is usually the actual Leica lens that's the cheapest to buy for 50mm. That's a Leica brand. This is a later one that's coated. The image quality is okay when you compare it next to this. Usually you're probably going to pay twice as much for the Summicron, but in my opinion it's usually worth doing so. The couple of advantages that this older Elmar has, once it's actually collapsed down into the camera, it's very small. And when you use it with a older screw mount Leica, it is actually a pretty compact little camera to carry around. This one's a little bit bigger, but black and white or color, this is probably the one to go with. There's also the Voigtlander lenses. This is a 35 that's on the M4 right now. From what I've seen, buying this lens is probably the best way to go. Most of the 35mm vintage Leica lenses are very expensive, whether they're from Canon. You know, there's some Nikon screw mount lenses that you can get, and the Leica lenses, the old Summicrons, I believe. They're usually very expensive. I've owned a Summicron screw mount Leica 35mm, and it was actually more expensive than this lens. I think it was about $350 or $400. But this lens is, I think I paid $300 for this one. This is sharper with color, it's sharper with black and white, it's black. Some people like the black lenses. So I would pretty much pass. There is the Canon 35mm f2. That one's a little bit pricier. I've heard really good things about that. But they're usually anywhere from $500 to a little bit more. And for that much money, I would just buy one of these, or I would buy a Zeiss, a newer Zeiss 35mm lens. But that's just my opinion. There is a 90mm Elmar made by Leica, and I've owned one of those. They're a little bit long, they're a little bit, they're not compact compared to some of the other Leica lenses, but for a 90mm, I've only used it in black and white. I did shoot a little bit of color with it, but for black and white, the 90mm Elmar is really good. If you're shooting in the shade, if you don't have any sun coming your way, it's a very sharp lens. For 28mm, you have a fewer choices. There are some Voigtlander 28mm lenses. I did buy this Canon 28mm 3.5. It was hazy, and the focusing was a little bit stiff. So I sent it out, and they were actually able to clean off the fogging inside the elements. I think it was $75 to have it CLA'd. But I only paid $200 for this, and that's the reason that I went with it. But it doesn't have any scratches in the front and the back. Image quality is okay. Color, you know, you got to put it at f4, f5.6, and it's not too bad. Some of the pictures actually come out really good because they're not very saturated with color. Black and white, it's okay. It's not the greatest, but I didn't really want to. I don't use wide angle any. I like the 35mm lenses, but even that one I don't really use too often. But I've noticed that 28s are a little bit harder to come by, and I wouldn't be using it too often, so that's why I opted to buy this Canon lens. If you're able to find these in good condition, this is a really good buy. Some of the 50mm Voigtlanders are getting a little bit expensive too. I think they have an f1.5, but honestly, if you're going to buy a used 50mm lens, I would really try to save up and get a Summicron. I sold an older Summicron that had a separation, and that was a really bad mistake because it really took really sharp photographs. Black and white, it was. I mean, this is just as sharp, but I really didn't even notice a difference. It even had a little bit of a fog, and it had separation, but it was still a very sharp lens. And it didn't collapse, and it had a kind of a bigger focusing ring, so I really regret selling that Summicron. But I'm a big fan of this older one. If you can get your hands on that, it's worth saving some money for. If you can get it, this one was CLA too. It wasn't that foggy, but it was a little stiff, and it's a really nice lens. But most of the times you're going to be really well off buying these Voigtlander lenses. Even buying them new but used, you can save a little bit of money, and they're a very good deal. The problem with this, it's if you want to put any filters on it or a lens cap, they're a little bit harder to find. That may deter some people, but the lens cap I use for it is pretty good. But if you want a real small camera that you want to take around everywhere, this is a pretty neat little lens to use. The 90mm Elmar, like I was saying, is 90mm, probably the best deal. They're usually about $100. 28, Voigtlander makes some, but they're a little bit bigger. If you can find these Canons, they're a pretty good deal. The 50s, you know, there's also Zeiss makes some real nice 50s. I wouldn't spend personally over $500 for a vintage Summicron. If you're going to spend more than $500, I would go and buy a Zeiss lens. Well, that's just a few choices that you have there. But some of the older lenses have, people want way too much money for them. If you really want to buy one of these older lenses, you kind of have to be patient. You have to look at auctions. You know, try to buy from a reputable dealer. KEH is great. Adorama and B&H are a little bit pricier. But all those places have a return policy, so that's a good thing to look out for. But with the vintage lenses, you really have to wait and wait, because some of the prices for these have really gone up with the people using them on digital, the Sony digital cameras, the digital Leicas, the NEX cameras. So they're starting to get a little bit more popular, but just kind of take your time, try to read some reviews on them, and just try to be patient and hold on for a good deal. More than all of these lenses have been CLA'd, which is going to be a good investment to make, so try to factor that into the final price of the lens. Good luck, and hope you enjoyed the video.